We can see that the brain is composed of many different structures, the largest part of the brain being the cerebrum. The cerebrum controls motor and sensory information, conscious and unconscious behaviors, feelings, and memory. It is divided into two hemispheres, the left controlling speech and abstract thinking, while the right hemisphere controls spatial thinking, finding meaning in shape, size, orientation, and location. The neurons that descend from the brain cross to the opposite side of the brainstem, meaning the right side of the brain controls the motor and sensory functions of the left side of the body. This results in impairments and deficits on the opposite side of the body. Damage to the cerebrum can result in cognitive impairments, which include difficulty with attention, memory, and problem solving. It can also affect the motor system with impairments in coordination, muscle weakness, and difficulty with movement. Damage to certain areas of the cerebrum can result in language impairment and difficulty with speech and reading. Behavioral impairments can also occur, resulting in aggression and emotional instability. These impairments can be seen if an individual has a stroke or acquires Alzheimer's. In stroke patients, the blood supply to the brain is interrupted, leading the damage to occur, resulting in the specific impairments highlighted on the mind map. Traumatic brain injuries can also be a reason for impairments occurring if the direct trauma affects the cerebrum. The cerebrum is then divided into 4 lobes. The frontal lobe is specifically responsible for motor function, cognitive processes such as attention, mood, self-awareness, and memory. Damage to the frontal lobe causes interruption of higher functioning brain processing, including social, behavioral, and motivation. The Broca area is also located in the left frontal lobe and is responsible for the production and articulation of speech. Subsequently, if damaged, then there is an inability for an individual to express language. Other impairments that can occur if the frontal lobe is injured can include paralysis, which is a loss of simple movements of various body parts. The planning and sequencing of complex movements needed to execute multi-step tasks becomes almost impossible. This is because of the nature of sequencing and organization required. The temporal lobe processes sensory information. It is essential for memory retention, language, and emotion. It also plays an important role in hearing and spatial perception. The Wernicke area is also located in the temporal lobe, which is responsible for understanding spoken and written language. Damage to the left part of the temporal lobe can lead to the impairment known as Wernicke aphasia. This is typically referred to as word salad speech, where the patient will speak fluently, but their words and sentences will lack meaning. Whereas damage to the right part leads to persistent talking, deficits in nonverbal memory, and difficulty processing certain aspects of sound. An impairment known as prosopagnosia can also occur, which is the inability to recognize faces. The temporal lobe is also a common site for seizures and temporal epilepsy. The occipital lobe is the visual processing area of the brain. It is associated with depth perception, color determination, object and facial recognition, and is the location of the visual cortex. Injury to the occipital lobe can occur due to vascular insults, lesions, trauma, infection, and seizures. Depending on the type and location of the injury, specific neurological deficits will occur. Unilateral occipital lobe lesions is a visual field deficit which occurs on the same side of both eyes contralateral to the site of lesions. Riddick syndrome is also associated with occipital lobe damage and results in the person only being able to see moving objects in the blind field, while non-moving objects are invisible. They are also unable to perceive shape and color, while movement agnosia is the inability to recognize the movement of an object. The parietal lobe is a primary cortical area for somatic sensation. It is vital for sensory perception and integration, including the management of taste, hearing, sight, touch, and smell. Damage to the frontal aspect of the parietal lobe may lead to impaired sensation and numbness on the contralateral side of the body. When brain damage occurs due to a parietal stroke, it can impair functions relating to a lack of spatial awareness and a loss of perception of the body's position in space. If this occurs, a person may not have a sense of what's happening on the left side of a space. Known as hemiagnesia, this can cause a person, for example, to shave or apply makeup to only the right side of the face and behave like the other side doesn't actually exist. Damage to the left hemisphere of the parietal lobe can cause aphasia, which is a loss of the ability to understand or express speech. Apraxia is the difficulty with motor planning and complex movements. The dicephalon is an area of the brain which contains several structures which include the thalamus. This relays information to the cerebral cortex regarding the processing of emotion, memory, touch, and stimulus. It also regulates consciousness, arousal, and attention. The epithalamus incorporates the pineal gland, and its function is to produce melatonin, which is needed for sleep and the circadian rhythm. The hypothalamus plays a critical role in the regulation of various bodily functions, including temperature, hunger, and thirst, sleep and wakefulness, and hormone production, which can delay developmental and growth within children. Dysfunction of the thalamus can result in movement disorders and aphasia, whilst dysfunction of the epithalamus can result in vision disturbances and sleep disorder. Due to the wide range of hormones regulated by the hypothalamus, many of the impairments relate to dysregulation within specific body temperature, appetite, sleep, adrenal insufficiency, and other problems related to homeostasis. The cerebellum plays a role in motor movement and regulation and balance control. The cerebellum coordinates gait and maintains posture, controls muscle tone, and voluntary muscle activity. The cerebellum receives afferent information about voluntary muscle movements from the cerebral cortex and from the muscle, tendons, and joints. It also receives information concerning balance from the vestibular nuclei. Damage to the cerebellum can lead to ataxia, dysmetria, dysarrhythmia, dysodiaconesis, tremor, and hypotonia. Cerebellar ataxia is a group of disorders that results from damage to the cerebellum. It can cause problems with balance, coordination, and fine motor skills. Dysmetria is a problem judging distance or ranges of movement. Dysrhythmia results in problems with speech articulation. Dysdiakinesia is the inability to perform rapid alternating movements such as walking, and hypotonia is decreased muscle tone. Tremors often occur because of injury to the cerebellum. There are three distinguished types of tremors. Postural, which is when you're holding your body part motionless against the force of gravity. Kinetic tremor, which occurs with voluntary movement. And intentional tremors, which happens with a goal-directed movement and worsens as the individual approaches the target. Another important component of the brain is the brainstem. This is located at the base of the brain and connects the brain to the spinal cord. It is composed of three sections: the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. It is also where all of the cranial nerve nuclei except those associated with vision are located. The brainstem also contains nuclei important for sympathetic and parasympathetic functions, leading to breathing, consciousness, blood pressure, heart rate, and sleep. It also controls balance, coordination, and reflexes. More specifically, the midbrain is crucial for regulating eye movements. The pons coordinates facial movements, hearing, and balance, and the medulla oblongata helps regulate breathing, heart rhythm, blood pressure, and swallowing. Clinical problems can affect the brainstem such as strokes, demyelination process, and hemiplegia. Severe brainstem lesions can also affect cardiovascular and and respiratory regulation. Damage to the brain stem may also present as muscle weakness, visual changes, dysphagia, vertigo, speech impairment, pupil abnormalities, insomnia, respiratory depression, or death. The spinal cord is a part of the central nervous system and consists of a tightly packed column of nerve tissue. It is connected to the brain via the brainstem and runs through the vertebral column. It consists of 31 pairs of spinal nerves which connect the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. The three primary roles of the spinal cord are to send motor commands from the brain to the body, send sensory information from the body to the brain, and coordinate reflexes. Sensory information includes things such as sensing temperature, pain, and pressure. In terms of initiation of movement, the spinal cord receives motor commands from the brain and transmits them to the appropriate muscles to initiate contraction. The spinal cord is responsible for coordinating reflexes, which are rapid and automatic responses to stimuli that help protect the body from harm. For example, when you touch a hot stove, your hand automatically pulls away before you consciously feel the pain. Injury to the spinal cord can result from trauma, such as a car accident or a fall. The severity of injury depends on the location and extent of the damage, but can result in paralysis or loss of sensation below the level of injury. Another impairment that can be seen in relation to the spinal cord are lesions. These form in patients with multiple sclerosis as a result of damage to the nerve cells in the central nervous system. These lesions occur because in multiple sclerosis, the immune system attacks a myelin found on the outside of the nerve cell. The loss of myelin slows down the electrical signals sent through the central nervous system and can cause altered sensations within the body, relating to pain, numbness, and tingling. Basal ganglia play a crucial role in the control of voluntary movements, memory, emotion, and the regulation of motor behavior. The basal ganglia are also involved in learning, particularly the formation of procedural memories like learning to ride a bike. Basal ganglia mediate some and other higher cortical functions as well, such as planning and modulation of movement, memory, eye movements, reward processing, and motivation. Degeneration of the basal ganglia and consequently its dysfunction can lead to several neurological conditions. Characteristic features of the basal ganglia lesions is a movement disorder in which there is either too little movement, hypokinesia, too much, hyperkinesia, or a combination of both, depending on the location and extent of the affected structure. Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative disorder that affects the dopamine-producing neurons in the substantia nigra, a region of the basal ganglia. This leads to the characteristic symptoms of tremors, rigidity, bradykinesia, which is a slowness of movement, and postural instability.